You scroll, you watch, you observe, but you don't post. Not the selfie, not the celebration, not the vulnerability, not even the ordinary moments. And maybe you tell yourself it's because you're private, because you're not seeking validation, because you don't care. But if we're honest, it's more complicated than that. There's a paradox here. The same instinct that protects you from exposure is the very instinct that keeps you invisible. And invisibility feels safe until it starts to feel lonely. You've learned that being seen is dangerous, that visibility invites judgment, that expression invites misunderstanding, and exposure invites vulnerability, and vulnerability invites pain. So you chose silence. You convinced yourself that you are above the noise, detached, observant, independent. But sometimes, late at night, there's a subtle ache. Not because you want attention, but because you want recognition without performance, connection without scrutiny, presence without pressure. You don't post because you don't want to curate yourself, but you also don't post because you're afraid of what people might do with your authenticity. What once protected you, privacy, restraint, emotional containment, may now be quietly isolating you. And this is not about algorithms, it's about identity. People who rarely post on social media often share a specific psychological architecture. Not all, but many. It begins with avoidant attachment. Avoidant attachment forms when a child learns that expressing emotional needs does not reliably bring comfort. Instead, it brings dismissal, intrusion, or subtle shame. So the child adapts. They internalize one rule: don't need too much, don't show too much. As adults, this becomes emotional self-containment. You share selectively, you process privately, you feel deeply, but display minimally. Posting online feels like emotional exposure, and exposure triggers the same nervous system response it once did in childhood: tighten, withdraw, regulate alone. There's also often a history of emotional invalidation, when feelings were minimized or misunderstood. Maybe you were told you were too sensitive. Maybe your excitement was met with indifference. Maybe your vulnerability was later used against you. The brain encodes these experiences in the default mode network, the system associated with self-referential thinking. When you imagine posting something, that network lights up with simulations. What will they think? Will they misunderstand? Will this be judged? Will this change how they see me? To someone else, posting is casual. To you, it's a social risk assessment. Then there is hypervigilance, a heightened scanning for social threat. People who grew up navigating unpredictable emotional climates become exquisitely sensitive to subtle cues of rejection or disapproval. A delayed reply, a lack of likes, a critical comment. For some, these are trivial. For you, they register somatically. The body tightens, the mind replays, the nervous system remembers. So you avoid the stage entirely. And over time, privacy becomes identity. I'm just not the type who posts. But sometimes that sentence hides something deeper. I don't feel safe being fully seen. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But becoming who you truly are requires visibility. And visibility requires risk. When you don't post, when you habitually withhold expression, something subtle happens. You begin to curate your absence. You become known as the quiet one, the mysterious one, the observer. And there is power in that. But there is also grief. Because parts of you never receive mirroring. No one celebrates your small victories. No one witnesses your transformation. No one sees the evolution you are privately enduring. And human beings are relational creatures. We are not designed merely to exist. We are designed to be seen. The philosopher Seneca wrote about the fear of public opinion, how we imprison ourselves by imagining the judgments of others. And Rilke spoke of living the questions rather than performing answers. But here's the tragedy. In trying to avoid superficial validation, you may also be avoiding authentic resonance. You fear judgment, but beneath that is a deeper fear. What if I reveal myself and no one responds? What if I speak and it echoes back empty? So you choose preemptive withdrawal over potential rejection. You tell yourself it's independence, but sometimes it's self-protection. And the cost is subtle. Diminished spontaneity, chronic self-editing, emotional solitude, a quiet belief that your inner world is safer unshared. Invisibility keeps you safe from criticism. It also keeps you safe from intimacy. And safety is not the same thing as aliveness. When this pattern extends beyond social media, it shapes adult life in profound ways. You might, 1. Struggle with vulnerability in relationships. You share thoughts, not feelings, logic, not longing. 2. Downplay your achievements. Success feels like something to minimize rather than celebrate. 3. Avoid self-promotion at work. You rely on competence to speak for you, and sometimes it doesn't. 4. Have difficulty asking for help. Independence feels morally superior to need. 5. Overthink communication. You rewrite texts, you replay conversations, you imagine interpretations. 6. Feel unseen even when loved, because you've never practiced sustained visibility. These are not flaws, they are adaptations. At some point, invisibility protected you. Maybe being visible attracted criticism. Maybe expressing joy triggered envy. Maybe vulnerability was exploited. So you learned to regulate alone. You became emotionally self-sufficient. But self-sufficiency, when overextended, becomes isolation. And here's the nuance. Not posting on social media is not inherently unhealthy. Privacy can be powerful. Disinterest in performance culture can be deeply grounded. The question is not whether you post. The question is your silence a choice or a defense? If you feel peace in your invisibility, that is alignment. But if you feel a quiet shrinking, a hesitation, a fear masked as indifference, then something deeper is at play. Awareness is the first disruption of the pattern. Because once you see that your avoidance is protective, not essential, you gain agency. You realize, I am not invisible because I am insignificant. I became invisible because I learned it was safer. And what is learned can be unlearned. Healing does not mean becoming an influencer. It does not mean oversharing. It does not mean forcing yourself into exposure therapy through selfies. Healing means reclaiming the choice. It means asking, if I knew I wouldn't be judged, what would I share? If I knew I wouldn't be abandoned, what would I express? If I knew I was worthy of being seen, how would I show up? There are practical steps. Inner child work. Revisit the early moments where visibility felt unsafe. Speak to that younger version of you. Validate their fear. Tell them the world is larger now. Shadow work. Examine the parts of you that crave recognition, the part that wants to be admired, acknowledged, celebrated. Instead of shaming it, integrate it. Nervous system regulation. Before sharing something vulnerable, notice your body. Breathe slowly. Ground yourself. Teach your system that visibility is not danger. Micro-exposure. Start small. Share something minor. Express a thought. Reveal a preference. Practice tolerating being seen in manageable doses. But most importantly, choose softness over survival. You survived by being careful. Now you are allowed to live by being authentic. Visibility does not mean performance, it means congruence. And perhaps the goal is not to post more. Perhaps the goal is to stop hiding from your own reflection. to allow your inner world to touch the outer world, to risk resonance, to risk being misunderstood, to risk being known. Because as Jung suggested, wholeness requires integrating both the light and the shadow, both the private and the expressed. You are not weak for wanting privacy. You are not broken for fearing exposure. But you deserve relationships where you are seen, not just sensed. You deserve to occupy space, not just observe it. So whether that means posting once a year or never at all, let it be a conscious choice, not an inherited fear. And if this resonated with you, if you saw yourself somewhere in these words, consider sharing this with someone who might need to hear it. Not for attention, but for connection. Because the goal is not to be fixed, but to become whole. When silence is strength. Before we go deeper, something must be honored. Not everyone who doesn't post is avoidant. Not everyone who is private is wounded. Not everyone who is quiet is afraid. Some people simply refuse to commodify their inner world. In an era shaped by platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, visibility is often confused with value. But restraint can be power. There are individuals who do not post because they don't experience identity as something to broadcast. They prefer depth over distribution. They believe intimacy belongs in private spaces. They experience observation as richer than performance. This is not fear. This is discernment. Psychologically, this can reflect secure attachment, the absence of compulsion. They don't need to prove presence because they already feel internally anchored. For them, invisibility is not a shield, it's sovereignty. The difference is subtle but profound. Defense says, if I'm seen, I'll be hurt. Security says, I don't need to be seen to feel whole. One contracts, the other simply doesn't chase. So part of the work is differentiation. Are you withdrawing, or are you simply uninterested? Are you bracing, or are you grounded? If you feel no internal friction, no fear spike when imagining posting, then your silence may be authentic alignment. But if even the thought of expression tightens your chest, there's more to explore.